in, and that you can carry on being part of the session. So I think that's all for now. There's some things going that will be put into the chat as well to tell you a bit more about Festival of Debate and this particular session. But for now, we'll start talking about Nature Recovery Sheffield. So just to introduce who we are, we've come together to collaborate around addressing the nature emergency, and particularly working locally and acting locally, but thinking globally about how we can help to tackle the nature crisis. And we're very keen to kind of see the nature and climate crisis together, and that there are opportunities and solutions that will support our wildlife and habitats, as well as help us tackle the climate emergency. So we know that the Sheffield City Council and the area of Sheffield have declared a climate emergency already, and then there are discussions about how to tackle that. And we in turn want to make sure that as we tackle the climate crisis, we also tackle the nature crisis at the same time. And we really need your help to raise the profile of this issue. And we really hope that by the end of this evening, you'll feel as passionate and committed about this as we do, and that you'll join with us to declare a nature emergency on the 21st of May, on Friday next week. We particularly want to create a real kind of event, particularly on social media, to highlight the nature crisis. And there'll be ways, we'll talk more about some of the ways that we'll be doing that later on, and how you can sign up to that. So the current coalition of the willing are represented on this slide. There's a logo here of, for all the different partners, so that you've got an idea of who's currently involved. But we hope this is really just the start, and we hope that in future there'll be many, many more logos on this slide, too many to fit on one screen. And that many partners will join with us, many individuals, people in communities, local community groups, schools, businesses, big corporate organisations, the council and parish councils, right across, farmers and agencies such as Environment Agency, Yorkshire Water. We really hope that everyone right across the piece can work with us together on tackling this nature emergency. So just to begin with then, I'm going to speak for a short while just to share with you some of the reasons why we think it's so important to declare this nature emergency in Sheffield, to recognise that there is a nature crisis, and then to think about what that means and how we can take action. The declaration is obviously just the start of the process, but an important step for us recognising some of the issues that our wildlife faces. So to begin with, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about some of the kind of bigger picture, and then what we can do locally. So going right out globally, there's a lot of talk in the preparation and run up to COP26 about the global situation with biodiversity. And there's some really interesting work being done by the United Nations about biodiversity, looking at analysis of big data sets and thinking about species across the globe. And there's these reports you can look at online. But one of the things that really stood out to me in one of the reports was this statement that species, the diversity of species between species and of ecosystems, is declining faster than any time in human history. So there's a real kind of recognition that we're really seeing quite unprecedented change in the decline of species, both in terms of different types of species that exist, different types of plants and animals and insects and birds, as well as the actual abundance, the population sizes of them. They're shrinking. There's a lot less of them than there used to be. I know we probably all personally can relate to that in terms of seeing how many insects we see, how many butterflies we see, how many birds we see around us. So the UK has been looking at how it kind of works to these targets and is part of this global picture. And the UK signed up to biodiversity targets in 2010 to be delivered by 2020. There were 20 targets, and recently the UN's been reflecting on these targets, think, well, you know, how have we all done over the last 10 years, ready for thinking about 2030. And unfortunately, of these targets, only 6 have been partially met across the globe. And indeed, in the UK, there's a feeling that even less, perhaps only 3 or 4 were partially met. And we ourselves have just not been delivering or leading the world in terms of how we demonstrate the importance of biodiversity to us and our protection of it. So unfortunately, we're in the situation where the State of Nature report in 2016 highlighted that the UK is actually one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, which is an awful place for us to be. You know, I'd like us to be one of the countries with most nature abundancy in the world, just to be a really shining example. But that's really not where we are. So we can't just look around the world and say, look over the borders and say, point fingers at what's happening elsewhere. It's a much wider issue than that. Yes, but we need to look to our own doorsteps as well. So looking closer to home, looking at Sheffield, we did a State of Nature report in 2018, which gave an overview of some of the change that's gone on in Sheffield and around the area over many decades. And we've just seen a kind of ongoing trend of decline. And this report is still available, and please do take a look at it if you want to see any more about some of the detail that's in that, some of the recommendations. And it highlighted trends and themes which are as relevant to Sheffield as they are across to the themes that will affect biodiversity across the world that the UN will be talking about at COP26. So, for example, things like fragmentation of sites. So we have local wildlife sites in positive management. For example, Smithy Wood and Greno Woods here are local wildlife sites, but Greno Woods is in good management for nature, it's in good condition, but sadly Smithy Wood is not. It's not looked after, and a number of other local wildlife sites are not looked after, which means they're not in good condition for nature. It's a real thing to tackle. But also in terms of fragmentation, this used to all be one woodland, and it's now been cut up by roads and development, and a lot of connection and connectivity has been lost, which is going to be really critical for species trying to manage the effects of and impacts of climate change. Other issues such as development, and a lot of you may be aware of the impact of development on local wildlife sites and the potential loss of sites that could be really great for nature. There's some the sites at Althorpe that have recently been identified as being, potentially new local wildlife sites, which is what we're going to need to talk about. We're going to need to talk about additional sites for nature. So where are those additional sites for nature going to be? And we have them developing and being created in places in Sheffield, but unfortunately this is an example where it will be lost to development if the plan goes ahead. So loss of sites and fragmentation is something that is relevant across the world. And then there's the issue about how intensively managed our sites are, and this is an example on west of Sheffield where we have really intensive management. Some of the farms are really well managed for wildlife, some less so. And then we have very intensively managed moorlands, and you can see here from this Google Earth picture the fragmentation of the habitat and intensive management by burning of what should be a really kind of abundant and thriving habitat that's globally important. We have persecution of wildlife, which is seen globally as well. Loss of species such as mountain hares and birds of prey, for example. And, you know, in the city, we have a loss of mammals like we're seeing everywhere. And so, for example, hedgehogs have been in major decline. 30% were lost just in the last decade in Sheffield, it's estimated. And that's a picture of decline that's seen across the country. So they're kind of in this perfect storm, hedgehogs, of not being able to cope with fragmented habitats, the connection between gardens and spaces for them. There's an issue of them crossing boundaries such as roads. And then our obsession with being tidy and using strimmers and all those sorts of things are really affecting these mammals. And we've lost grasslands across the city and out into the more rural parts of Sheffield in particular. And you can see from this that we've really lost a lot of the farmland specialists that rely on quite specific types of habitat and grassland. And another theme that's very common globally is the rise in invasive non-native species. This is where a species has been taken out of its normal habitat and moved by some means, fair or foul, across the country, across the globe, and suddenly found itself in a place where its predators or the things that keep it in check are no longer there, and it has an absolute heyday. So, for example, the American mink escaped into the river courses like it did across the country, and we find those in Sheffield, and they've played havoc with the water ecosystem, and the water vole suddenly has met quite a demise, much as a result of that. And we're seeing increasing disease and pests again from this influx from across the world of different species, and ash dieback is now in Sheffield, and we'll be seeing and already are seeing large mature trees being taken out and felled. So that is one of just a number of pests and diseases heading our way, such as Phytophthora as well. And all of this is exacerbated by climate change, and the State of Nature report used this really great graph from Western Park Museum, which illustrates that locally we are seeing these kind of increases in temperature and sun hours that we talked about are actually a reality. And you might think kind of, oh, you know, why does this all matter if we lose a few furry animals and a few insects and a few plants, you know, how will that actually affect our lives? Well, apart from obviously the joy of nature and what it does for our health and well-being, this map sort of demonstrates some of the benefits that nature brings to us, and the things that we rely on are very much about this complex web of nature of which we are a part, that interacts between the plants and habitats around us. And the biodiversity is a very key part of those ecosystem services, as we call them, the benefits that nature provides. And people are actually now trying to quantify and put monetary values on these because they're so critical. So that's you know, everything from the quality of our water, our drinking water, through to the cleanliness of the air that we breathe and rely on, through to the space that we have to play in and enjoy, and right through to how we in turn tackle the climate crisis, and where we can store carbon and lock carbon up and help ensure that we manage natural use tools such as natural flood risk management to manage water flowing into our homes and businesses. So it's really critical. So what can we do? Well, I hope I've not depressed you too much. What we're talking about here is a call to action to help us tackle these issues. We want you to really act locally and think globally. There are things that we can do right here in Sheffield, which will be part of that bigger picture, part of that bigger UK picture of turning around that position of us being the most nature depleted country, and part of being part of a global movement as part of COP26 to really tackle biodiversity and the climate crisis. So, you know, tackling climate and nature crisis together, we need climate and nature-based solutions that really work, things that benefit both nature and can help us tackle the climate emergency. So we need to tackle them together, but that's together as crisis, but also together as partners and together as a community. That's really critical because it's such a task we have on our hands. So that's why we've pulled together the Nature Emergency for Sheffield, the Nature Recovery Sheffield partnership, and that's what we hope will really help us move this forwards. So we're trying to get to a point where we can put together a nature recovery strategy for Sheffield that might cover things like the percentage of land and water that's great for nature that we want to see. You know, as a minimum, we think that should be around 30% by 2030. We might have key species we want to focus on. We want to make sure there's good quality spaces for nature for people to play in. Think about pesticide reduction targets, action on those invasive species I've talked about, more resilient environment, ready to tackle the impacts of climate change. Think about ways we can soak up carbon and find nature-based solutions, and really know that we're making a difference and looking very spatially at the sites that are really important and protecting them. And this is, you know, includes making sure that land is protected for nature, it's in good condition, it's better for nature, and it's really well connected and more joined up. And there's a lot of this in the Environment Bill, and which is currently stalled, but coming to the fore in the Queen's speech. So we really need people to keep an eye on the Environment Bill and talk to your MP and really make sure that you see the Environment Bill is really critical, and how say to them how important it is to you that we kind of really move this agenda forwards to protect and look after nature. So we need to think big and be bold and think about the landscape in grand terms and not boundaries of different ownership. And we need to look at connections across the nature recovery network. We need to think small. This is Bockham Parkway. Just a change in management can have such an amazing impact for biodiversity. And we need to be thinking boldly about the species that we might consider introducing or reintroducing, or the species we really need to conserve that are already threatened. We need to kind of really offer the chance for people to engage. We need people to really help us, people of all ages and from all communities across the city can be part of this. So we're really encouraging people to help both look at rural and urban opportunities, work together in partnership, be really active in our communities, and really kind of challenge the council on decision making about climate and nature. So thank you for that, and I hope my whistle stop tour wasn't too firstly depressing, but hopefully gives you some food for thought. I am now going to pass over to a colleague on the Nature Recovery Sheffield Coalition Partnership, which is a representative from Sheffield Green Parents, and it's Rachel. Rachel is going to tell you about her view on this important topic. She is a full-time mum with 2 young daughters, so representing Sheffield Green Parents, but also Kids Plant Trees. So in her short presentation, she's going to explain why she felt compelled to act on the nature emergency and why she thinks it will involve, it's vital to involve preschool and primary age children in any plans or actions. So I'm going to just stop sharing my screen and allow Rachel to now say her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I couldn't unmute there. Brilliant. Okay, thanks, Liz. Okay, so I hope that this short presentation demonstrates why it is vital to involve preschool and primary age children in any plans or actions to restore nature. I will explore the many barriers that prevent young families from developing a close relationship with nature, and finally provide an argument to show that if these barriers are not addressed, then the restoration of nature could prove futile. When I first became pregnant, I imagined the lifestyle that I wanted to create for my own children, and I was inspired by my most precious childhood memories, all of which were playing outdoors in gardens, parks, woodland and countryside. I would think of the time I met my first hedgehog, or the time I watched fox cubs play on the lawn in the evening sun. I hope that my children's sense of adventure and imagination would be inspired by plants and animals, and that as their love of nature grew, that they would become advocates for the environment and all it supported. But in the last 3 years, I have learned that in reality, a simple and natural upbringing was actually hard to find. And so I began to question why in Sheffield, the outdoor city, was I finding it so hard to spend time outdoors and inspiring a love of nature in my little one. The short answer is this city has a complete lack of accessible wildlife-enriched wild spaces. In 2005, Richard Louv published the book Last Child in the Woods and coined the phrase nature deficit disorder. Louv suggests that we humans have an inherent need to be connected to and feel part of nature. When we are denied the fulfillment of that need, we experience physical and mental disease. The book describes in great detail the grave impacts of a life spent indoors in front of TVs, video games, computers, phones and social media platforms. He references many studies which have so far shown that a lack of time spent outside in green wild spaces will lead to an increase in childhood obesity, vitamin D deficiency, reduction in physical fitness and cardiorespiratory health, and an increase in mental health illness. I think it's the statistics about children's mental health which shock me the most. In 2017, 18,000 children under the age of 12 in the UK were prescribed antidepressants. Only time will tell the full impact of the COVID pandemic on these statistics, but I think we all know the figures for 2020 and beyond will be worse, not better. Other more recent studies that I have found also link technology use to short-sightedness and sleep disturbance. But the physical and mental health and well-being of my children isn't my only concern. The 2012 Natural Childhood Report by Stephen Moss, commissioned by the National Trust, highlights other worrying points. In particular, a quote from Dr. William Bird. The critical age of influence appears to be before 12 years. Before this age, contact with nature in all its forms, but in particular wild nature, appears to strongly influence a positive behaviour towards the environment. And in the words of David Attenborough, no one will protect what they don't care about, and no one will care about what they have never experienced. So what does this mean for the future of environmentalism and the environment? It's not just children who need nature, nature needs children too. Louv concludes, if we are going to save environmentalism and the environment, we must also save an endangered species, the child in nature. We need our children to fall in love with nature and all the benefits it can give them to ensure that the next generation continues to care for all that we are fighting to save. So what are the barriers that prevent young families from connecting with nature? The list is long and multifaceted. For the majority that live within a city, we no longer live as if we are part of nature. Instead, it is something that is out there that we visit, and when we do visit, we may or may not interact with it. In just a generation, children's freedoms have reduced significantly. It has been reported that the area around a child's home where they can explore unsupervised has shrunk by nearly 90%. This is down to dangerously fast and busy traffic levels and a parent's fear of stranger danger. And one of the reasons that 3/4 of children aged 5 to 12 in the UK now spend less time outdoors than prison inmates, who require, according to UN guidelines, at least 1 hour of exercise in the open air every day. But this lack of outdoor time is completely understandable once we acknowledge that our kids are now completely reliant on an adult to have the time, inclination, and means of taking them to nature. Parents of young children are busy juggling roles whilst being sleep deprived and exhausted. We need wild spaces on our doorstep and ones in which children are permitted to explore. Wildlife reserves in our city are few and far between. These require extra time to travel to and a car to travel in. Technology, as previously discussed, is nature's biggest competitor for children's attention. Our outdoor spaces now need to be more enthralling than ever. A family's socio-economic status will dictate the amount of time, energy, knowledge of importance and funds that they have to dedicate to spending time outdoors. So even the weather can become a barrier between children and nature if a family can't afford appropriate outdoor wear. Environmental racism exists. Children of colour are disproportionately affected by all the adverse effects of not spending time in wild spaces and all the barriers that stand in the way. I'm a full-time mum by choice, but not everyone has or wants that option. Most children now attend nursery, preschool and then school. A child's free time is considerably reduced, and the type of environment that they spend the majority of time in is dependent on which early years setting they attend. Most would be indoors with some time spent outside in a concrete playground. Forest nurseries and schools are becoming more popular, but they are still not the norm, and the nursery option can often be too expensive to be inclusive to all. If we are to ensure that all children have equal access to wild spaces, it is wrong to assume that families have the time or economic means to create their own wildlife gardens. We are a city that is full of parks and recreation grounds, but we have no wild spaces. And wildlife beyond a squirrel, pigeon or blackbird is hard for a small child to spot. So I have to ask, for a society that is suffering from chronic nature deficit disorder and one that is in a state of climate and ecological emergency, why aren't we managing parks, recreation grounds and other green areas of land like precious wild spaces? Instead, our parks usually consist of uninspiring green fields that are mown too short, too frequently, earmarked for team sports and covered in dog poop. We have structured playgrounds that do not encourage imaginative play and exploration, and this type of play is so important for building a child's resilience, creativity, problem-solving skills and ingenuity. It doesn't have to be difficult, just think of hills to run down and long grass to hide in. When you do find a bit of wild space or some trees to climb, you'll often find signs that say keep to the footpath and don't climb the trees, which are well-meaning but again distance kids from interacting with nature. Pesticides are sprayed frequently in parks, including on and around children's play equipment, potentially causing serious health problems in our children and definitely contributing significantly to biodiversity loss and the decline of nature in our parks. Weeds are pretty flowers to children and they don't get to see enough of them. School playgrounds are mostly uninspiring concrete, even though research has shown that a green view from a window can significantly increase a child's concentration and focus. So why doesn't every school have green walls around playground perimeters? So what could green-minded parents contribute to the restoration of nature in our city? We can't escape technology. I wouldn't suggest that we even try. The sleep deprivation and exhaustion from juggling busy family life is part of the course. But I do believe that the great outdoors can compete with technology and provide a tonic for the exhaustion. When nature is in abundance, it is more exciting, enthralling and memorable than any kind of technology, and its positive effects are tangible and long-lasting. As TV presenter Nick Baker said, you'll never forget your first badger, just as you'll never remember your highest score on a computer game, no matter how important you felt it was at the time. In my case, I'll never forget the foxes playing on the lawn. For Pearl, my 3-year-old daughter, sadly, it may be the dead seal and her pup that we found washed up on a Northumberland beach just last week. I find myself wondering how that experience will shape her future relationship with the natural world. The benefits of nature are felt by everyone. Families are multi-generational, consist of every ethnicity and are from every socio-economic background. Nature can and does connect us all. We need habitats for nature to thrive in doorstep accessible areas for families to enjoy. We need our inherent need for connection to nature to be realised. We need nature and nature needs us. Sheffield is full of community-led groups and organisations that want to do more in and for nature. Kids Plant Trees is an example of a new community group that organises events for families to get outside, planting trees, creating and caring for woodland. The uptake from volunteers has been phenomenal. Multi-generational, cross-faith, ethnically diverse and from all economic backgrounds. Give families the space to be wild in the wild and they will come. They will love it and they will continue to protect it in the future. This is why I, Kids Plant Trees and Sheffield Green Parents fully support the declaration of a nature emergency in Sheffield. So thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them during the Q&A at the end. Our next speaker is Cathy Rhodes. Cathy was a consultant obstetrician in Birmingham until early retirement last year. She moved to Sheffield in 2018 when her husband became the priest at St John's, Ranelagh. Cathy took up the voluntary role of Environment Officer for Sheffield Diocese on the first day of the first lockdown. So it's over to Cathy.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Thank you, and thanks for your talk. I've really loved listening to you. I'm just going to share my screen and put up my presentation. Bear with me for one moment. Can one of the hosts give me a thumbs up? You can see my presentation. Thank you. So I'm really happy to be here representing the Diocese of Sheffield. As Rachel said, I'm the Diocesan Environment Officer for the Diocese. And I thought I would start off by saying, actually, what is the Diocese of Sheffield? Because I think that might be something that might be helpful for me to go through, particularly the boundaries. It actually is made up of Church of England organisations throughout South Yorkshire and just the southern parts of the East Riding. So on my map there, I hope you can see Goole at the top, and then there's Doncaster and Rotherham. Barnsley is just outside our area, but Sheffield is down there towards the south. So we cover actually quite a large area of a different mix of communities, urban, rural, small villages and towns. And we've got our three beautiful buildings, Doncaster Minster, Rotherham Minster and Sheffield Cathedral here on my slide. We're an Anglican diocese and there are 44 dioceses in England. It was created in 1914, so it's quite a new diocese. But as well as those buildings, we have green spaces. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here really to talk about this, because you may recognise there's a couple of well-known spaces there. The middle one is Wadsley Parish Church. This graveyard is looked after by volunteers. Some areas are left overgrown for wildlife. Other areas are left for wildflowers and are cut annually. And from mid-February, they've got snowdrops, crocuses, primroses and daffodils, and some beautiful pictures on their website. So it's an example there of an area which would have been undisturbed for many, many years with ecosystems that have established and very hardworking volunteers looking after it. Next door to it, some of you may recognise Walkey Cemetery, and the Friends of Walkey Cemetery manage this on behalf of St Mary's Church of England Parish. And you can see absolutely beautiful bluebells there. But as well as the burial sites, we also have church land associated with some of our churches. And the Google Maps photo there is actually of St Chad's Church in S8, which has a field behind it. And members of my working group and people are working towards establishing a community garden with benefits to wildlife using this green space, which at the moment is not necessarily working towards biodiversity and supporting nature recovery. And there are many green spaces around our diocese in Sheffield that are equivalent to that, around churches, around vicarages, around church halls, or just areas of green that are just nearby. And it won't surprise you probably to know that the Church of England is the 13th biggest landowner in the UK. There's some variation in the lists on this, but the most reliable information is that we own 105,000 acres. The Church of England is responsible for that land. And importantly, there's 16,000 churches in the Church of England, roughly, and 10,000 have churchyards. And if you add those all up, they're the equivalent of a small national park. So there's many reasons why we have been focusing locally, regionally, nationally and globally on this. We know that 1 in 7 of the UK's wildlife species at least are at risk of extinction, and churchyards are really important for their habitats, and they can be refuges for wildlife and plant life. When you think about it, there may be churches that have been there for many hundreds of years in communities, and the space around them will have been undisturbed for that time, and there are often rare species and plants and animals that need to be cared for and nurtured, and that the space is kept safe for them. It's a precious resource, and it can make a huge difference to the biodiversity of the UK, so we need to manage it. Regionally, I've talked about the Diocese of Sheffield and the areas that we cover, but also nationally, the Church of England is increasingly working on this area, and there are groups set up to map the green spaces we have. We have declared a nature and a climate emergency in Sheffield, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that later. But we're also thinking that it's really important to have nature-based solutions for both of those crises. And of course, using maybe some of our land for tree planting and other ways of capturing carbon is something that lots of people are looking at as well. But also globally, the church, the Anglican Communion, which involves the Church of England, is a family of about 40 independent groups of churches, and there's millions and millions of members in over 165 countries. I know everybody on this call is very likely to be fully aware of the situation for poorer countries, where the effect of the climate and nature crisis is felt very keenly, with very little resource to cope when extreme weather causes crop failure, or there's flooding or destruction of where people live. We're very aware, it's Christian Aid Week this week, and many of us are very aware of the suffering that's happening in many poorer countries who did not contribute to this problem. It's the richer economies that have had the big footprint on our earth. And finally, as a faith group, and we work with many other faith groups, and I'll mention that later as well, we have what's called a mark of mission. And the 5th mark of mission was added in 1990. And 30 years ago, there was an understanding that an ecological crisis and threats to the unity of creation meant that this would be added to the mission statement of the Anglican Church. And our mission is to strive to safeguard the integrity of creation and sustain and renew the life of the earth. And I think renewal is very much what we're talking about here when we're talking about nature recovery. Just to show some of the national points, this is just a screenshot of the Church of England website, and there's an increasing amount of information and work and resource going in to talking about how vital this is as part of the life of people in church communities and the institution of the church. You can see it says plants and animals are essential for sustaining ecosystems that give us food, fuel, health and wealth, and stating that as a faith group, as Christians, we're called to care for creation, and churches and churchyards are a really important part of the diverse natural habitat of England. And there's a whole load of resources on that website to support that. So coming back more locally, I started the job just over a year ago, as Rachel said, on the first day of lockdown. And what I thought was very important to get a framework in place with which over the next few years, the working group and myself and people within the diocese and church communities would be working for this crisis. So we have something called our synod, which is like the governing body of the diocese, and with the agreement of the bishops in November 2020, the motion there is there in its full wording, but we declared a climate and ecological emergency. We also supported a very radical motion for the Church of England for their synod, which stated that we would aim for all parts of the church to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2030. We're also writing a policy, which is going to be approved in a couple of months, and that includes looking at our care for churchyards and land and biodiversity. And we commit to a programme run by the charity Arosho, which gives us standards and structures to work towards sustainability in the area of the climate and nature emergency. And this is the Eco Church and Eco Diocese programmes, and some people on this call may have heard of those. So just to go through that a little bit more, because I think all of us sometimes have the feeling that this is such an enormous problem. We just aren't really quite sure where to start. What steps do we take? And having a structure, which is a questionnaire online, which churches and church communities that join this programme can look at, gives us a vision to care for creation as part of our faith pathway. and our command to love our neighbours, which is part of our belief. And so churches can go through a free online survey and they get points on their answers to those questions in 5 areas. And their worship and teaching, buildings, and then land, which is I've highlighted because it's very relevant to this, and engaging with local communities and global campaigns. Again, this is a local campaign, and that's why we're very, very pleased to be here joining with the groups in Nature Recovery Sheffield, and also the lifestyle of congregation. And that actually covers a huge amount of areas in everything you can think of environmentally is covered in this questionnaire. It's a very well-structured survey, and you build yourself up with your points to get different awards to measure your progress. It can be a really good way to just take simple steps, step by step, towards trying to take action, which is what we're committed to, having declared an emergency. We're also a registered eco-diocese, and we're working towards our Bronze Award, for which we need 10% of our 210 churches registered, and already 20 are registered and more are registering, so we'll meet that target. It just means that the awareness is spreading and more communities and churches are getting involved in this, and it's a concrete sign of that. We need to have awards, bronze and silver awards have been allocated to 8 churches, and so we need 2 more awards and then we will qualify. But we also need to think about education of the leaders in the church in these issues, and we're working on that. Diocesan schools, and we have a number of schools, are really important, and we're committed to work with Eco Schools and School Carbon Education South Yorkshire and other groups to help the diocesan schools engage with this. We should celebrate local events and ethical investments. That's a very high priority at the moment. There's a lot of discussion about that at the moment, about not investing in fossil fuels as a diocese, and we already invest in an ethical investment firm that doesn't invest in fossil fuels. We also need to work with other dioceses around us, such as Leeds Diocese or Derby Diocese, and faith groups. And I'm in touch with Faith for the Climate, which is an organisation some of you may have heard of, and it's a very powerful grouping when faith groups come together. And at the Paris Agreement, there was a strong representation from faith groups, and senior leadership figures felt that that was something that spoke to them, along with all the other people who were lobbying them. And that's something that I hope will be developing locally in Sheffield. We finally need a policy or a plan, and our plan will, as I said, support wildlife and encourage biodiversity in churchyards and gardens, and it'll put in our policy that we need to go by that we work in partnership with organisations caring for the natural world and being active in campaigns. So one of my last slides here is a little bit of a plug, because as part of this work, as I've been raising awareness on this along with the leadership team of the diocese and with the working group who have been fantastic in supporting us on this journey, we are putting on an Eco Church Festival with Our Rocha, the charity that runs the scheme, and also with the Church of England. We're partnering as well with an organisation called Caring for God's Acre, that for many years has been supporting churches doing biodiversity counts in their churchyards and feeding the data into the national biodiversity databases. And Churches Count on Nature is part of that, and the lead for that organisation is going to speak to us on the 12th of June on Zoom. This is free. She's going to talk about churchyards being brilliant for nature and recording wildlife. You may have heard of the tiny forest in Bristol that was reported in the national press, and I'm delighted to say that team is going to come and talk about their experience of planting a tiny forest, along with a professor of ecology who's going to talk about growing with trees. And I also am delighted that Nikki Rivers from the Wildlife Trust is going to talk about nature recovery networks, and we'll talk about Forest Church, which is a way to encourage people to have outdoor worship in different outdoor settings. We're also going to talk about how to make those green spaces we mentioned sustainable, where you start, and managing your land, which is part of the Eco Church journey and something that we'll be supporting people through. And finally, for all ages, Muddy Church, which is a fantastic name of a kind of church which involves basically going outside and getting muddy and wandering. So if anybody's interested in that, everybody's welcome, but there may be people particularly who are in communities that are thinking about eco-church or know that their church is thinking about it. We've also got some MPs coming, actually. Olivia Blake and Alex Stafford are going to be there, and there's some training on how to lobby your MP for. So those of you who are interested in that, that's also an opportunity to come to a free event where you get some really excellent training. And Linda McAvan, who was a previous MEP and very involved in the Europe climate organisations now, is going to be there to help with that too. So we've got some really good speakers. If you search for Eco Church Sheffield 2021, you'll find the Eventbrite page, and it's also on our website. So without further ado, I'm going to move on to introduce the next speaker. Just as Rachel said, if there's any questions at all, I'd be very happy to answer those in the discussion. But now I'd like to introduce Dawn Spear. And Dawn is the local group coordinator for Sheffield Greenpeace. She's been an active volunteer with Greenpeace and other local organisations for 2 years. And as the co-leader with her partner Richard, she holds regular meetings. She organises and coordinates global campaigns in our area and supports numerous environmental projects and activities in and around Sheffield. So I'm now going to hand over to Dawn, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you for introducing me. And before I start, I just want to say a huge thank you to Liz, Rachel and Kathy for their fantastic presentations, and also to the Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust team, who have done an amazing job of putting the nature recovery group's thoughts and ideas together into a workable format, and for producing an easy to use website for people to join up to the nature recovery scheme. So without further ado, I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully I'll do it without making any issues. Bear with me a second. Can you see my screen? Is that okay? Can I have a thumbs up? Fantastic. Great stuff. So, nature is amazing. And the next time you walk out of your door, I want you to take a closer look at the plants, the landscape, the birds, the insects, and the flowers and trees, and think yourself lucky that you've got it. And I'm going to run through some quick and easy ideas that can help you to help nature in your space. Sadly, as you've heard, plants and wildlife are on the decline in Sheffield, and nature needs your help. We can all make a difference and turn the grey of Sheffield back to the green space it once was by creating the space for nature in our lives. The best part about it is that creating that space often doesn't take any effort. Literally no effort at all, and I'm going to show you how. So thousands of people have stopped mowing the lawns in spring, and as insects are coming out of hibernation, they're seeking flowers for pollination and nectar, which are essential for their survival and are in short supply in the early months. So to help the insects flourish, people are allowing the grass to grow, along with the dandelions and daisies and the other plants that we consider to be weeds. And that takes no effort. Helping nature just doesn't get any easier than that. And bees are one of the biggest contributors to pollination in the world, one of the most important insects, and we must do all we can to protect them. By attracting pollinators, sorry, just bear with me a second, I think I've moved on too quickly. Hang on, I've gone back too far. I'm really sorry about this. By attracting pollinators like honeybees, native bees, butterflies and moths, you can help the garden and the environment at the same time. Planting flowers like borage, sweet peas, sunflowers and wildflower mixes will not only bring pollinators to your garden, it will give you a fabulous display throughout the summer and autumn months. If you haven't got a broad garden, that's not a problem either. You can use your windowsill, and you can put flowers and herbs on there, or you can throw a few plants into tubs and planters and put them on your doorstep. Or if you've got a wall space, put some hanging baskets up. Plants will brighten up any spot and are very inexpensive if you grow them from seed. And if you live in a flat or use a community, you can use a communal space to go grow plants. So a couple of years ago, I met a lovely lady by the name of Margaret, and she's in her 70s from Norton. And she started planting flowers in and around roadsides in a neighbourhood. And then she went on to design a fabulous flower bed in between the flats where she lives. I've included a few photos of what she's done to give you an idea of what you're capable of as people. And she's also now included her friends and neighbours who have now joined her, and they're now planting. The planting's now spread across the estate. It's amazing to see how one person has inspired other people. And where once there were brick walls and grass, there are now colourful flower beds buzzing with life. So when you put your plants in to attract your pollinators, the last thing you want is for slugs and snails to wreak havoc in the garden and demolish your seedlings and decimate the leaves of large plants. And although slug pellets are an effective deterrent, they contain metaldehyde, which can harm the hedgehogs, wildlife, pets and children. One glance at the label on the back is enough to warn anyone against its use. So please don't use this poisonous substance or any other pesticides which are detrimental to wildlife. Look for natural alternatives. And did you know that coffee grounds deter slugs instead? They won't go anywhere near your plants when you put them around and sprinkle them around. And fresh ground coffee is much nicer than instant, so give it a try. And you can rest easy knowing that you haven't sprinkled poison around the wildlife, and your pets and children won't be consuming them. Bird life. So it's easy to invite wildlife into your space. And for birds, it only takes some seed, maybe a few fat balls, or even a few crumbs of bread, and you'll have birds flocking in to feed. And by adding a tray under the bird feeder, you can catch the seed that would normally be dropped to the ground, and the seed can be emptied back into the tray and put into the feeder to save waste and deter vermin. Sorry, I've done it again. You can also add a bird bath. It doesn't need to be anything special, just something shallow enough to let the birds take a dip. In fact, the end photo here is of our bird feeder. And you can see the bowl on the end is actually a dog bowl, which just happens to fit the holder, and the birds love to come and take a dip. February to July is the busiest time for birds, building nests and looking after their offspring. And they need all the help that they can get. Feeding them will help to boost their survival rate, and you'll benefit by being able to listen to the soothing bird song and watch the birds swoop in and out of your garden. So plastic and litter in general is a huge problem for wildlife, as well as being unsightly. Small animals become trapped and die in plastic containers that are dropped on the roadsides and pavements every day. Plastic can also find its way into rivers and seas and suffocate and poison fish and other creatures. Did you know that it takes 20 years for plastic bags to break down and 450 years for a plastic bottle? And the problem doesn't stop there, because the plastic breaks down into microplastics, which the sea and river creatures ingest, which is yet another problem for wildlife. But you can help by reducing the amount of single plastics that you use and making sure that you recycle all plastics and don't drop litter. You can join the Sheffield litter pickers. There's over 3,000 litter pickers in Sheffield who go out every day and clean up your neighbourhoods to keep it free from litter and safe for wildlife. So you can also sign up and declare a nature emergency with us on Friday, the 21st of May, with hundreds of other Sheffield residents who care about nature. We'll be outside the town hall on Saturday between 12 and 2 with this amazing banner made by Richard Coates from XR. We'll also be outside Ponds Forge from 10:30 till 11:30 on the 19th of June. We know some people aren't comfortable speaking in front of a camera, So come down and have your photo taken in front of this fantastic banner and make a written declaration, but don't forget to use the hashtag Nature Sheffield. Please don't forget that you can make a difference. And when you sign up onto the Nature Sheffield Recovery website, we can email you and keep you abreast of new developments and actions that you can get involved in, like planting trees and nature conservation projects and lots more. Talk to your friends and your neighbours about the Nature Recovery Sheffield. Word of mouth is the best way to spread the word and encourage people to get involved. Have a conversation. And if you're involved in larger groups and organisations, why don't you ask us to come along and do a speaker presentation like this one? Working together, we can create a safe haven for nature in our beautiful green city. And for more tips on how to help wildlife, visit the Nature Recovery website. So please remember, don't cut your lawns, grow more plants and flowers. Don't use pesticides, use natural alternatives. Feed the birds, don't drop litter, use less plastic, and declare a nature emergency on the 21st of May with us. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you will all come away with some ideas that will help you that you'll implement to help nature in your space. Now I'm going to hand you back to Liz.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dawn. That's really so inspiring, so many ideas about how to take action. Very simple things, and you got the chat going as well, which is brilliant. So thanks ever so much, Dawn. And to all our other speakers, thank you as well. Just a reminder there in the chat about a couple of things Dawn mentioned. So the key thing that we hope that you will remember this evening when you go away is to decide whether you'll join us in declaring a nature emergency in Sheffield on the 21st of May. And if you want to be part of that, we really hope you will, to sign up at our Nature Recovery website, and the details are in the chat. And if you can help spread the word as well, that's really key. We need to kind of get a swell of support. So the more that we can get supporting us, the more people will listen, and the more action we can take, and the more impact we can have, the more chance we have of turning around this decline of nature. And using the hashtag Nature Sheffield will really help spread the word as well. So please do help us and take part. We hope we will be able to convince you by the end of this evening to do that. This is the Festival of Debate, and there's an opportunity now for some question and answer and some discussion. You've been putting some things in the chat, and some questions and some suggestions. So Claire is here from the Wildlife Trust. Hello, Claire, a little wave there. And so she's going to just help us now kind of run through some questions and put some of the questions you've put in the chat to us. So please do keep putting your questions in the chat as we go. We really would like to hear from you. Ask your questions, tell us what you think. If you've got any suggestions or ideas, it'd be great to hear from you. And if you've got a particular question to someone or one organisation, then make sure that we can tell that in your from your question in the chat. So Claire, putting you on the spot now, have you got any initial questions for us to
have? We had a question from Patrick, which is probably to everybody on the panel, because I think you'll all have ideas and ways of addressing this. It's largely about with regard to grass cutting and there being a lack of communication with the council. So he's asking how they can be better held to account.
Anyone keen to go first? Oh, Rachel's got a hand up straight away. Go for it, Rachel.
It was only just a quick question because we've actually had quite a few kind of conversations with a lot of councillors, and the one thing that the councillors told us that fills their inboxes is people complaining about the grass not being mown and the weeds being allowed to get too long and too big. And so my bit of advice would be, if you see the areas in Sheffield where they have allowed the grass to grow, and there are some areas, especially down towards kind of towards the parkway, going from sort of Kelham Island way, I noticed the other day that that was kind of all starting to grow and go a bit wild, is to actually email your local councillors and tell them that how good that bit looks as well, because I think if our voices are louder than the people that complain about the weeds, then maybe that would help the situation just slightly. They listen to who makes the most noise sometimes, I think.
You're exactly right, Rachel. So such a good point, that they, you know, councillors are politicians and they are swayed by the people that speak to them. So if you have an opinion and you want to see something happening, then please do contact your councillor. And one of the slides that I shared with you was of Bockham Parkway. Certain times of the year, you know, Bockham Parkway looks amazing, but it had been completely mown to within an inch of its life. But we managed to get the management regime of mowing changed, and it's now an amazing mini flower meadow. So it is possible, and there are so many opportunities in the road verges around Sheffield. Sheffield has some massive road verges, as well as some really quite boring bits of grass in its parks. So yeah, we need, this is part of why we're doing this here tonight, is we need to hear your voices. The council needs to hear your voices. So please speak with volume. Does anyone else want to come in from the panel on that question? No. Okay, Claire, back to you.
Here we go. Right, next one. We have a question from Heather. It's a challenge for you. Could we make South Yorkshire garden centres peat free?
I come in on this one.
Go for it, Kathy.
I am a very keen gardener, and we've used organic gardening principles for as long as we've had a garden, and we're currently in our 10th house since we got married. When you're married to a vicar, you move around a lot, and it drives me crazy that when I go to a garden centre, there's one pile of peat-free compost and every single other bag of compost has got peat in it. And I'm a member of the RHS, and they are really trying to push for it. And I think the only way forward is legislation. The only way to do it is to say, you know, we're not going to dig up peat for this, so that our seedlings, we think theoretically, will look better, because actually all of the scientific studies have shown that, you know, alternatives are good. I know there are some issues, because obviously there's some quite good articles online about this, obviously saying what are the alternative materials, and we have to be careful they also don't actually damage the environment. This is one of those things where we don't want to make sure the solution is not worse than the problem. Encouraging people to make their own compost, of course, and being you know, educated in that, or maybe even having communal compost, and you can get a lovely compost delivery. Wouldn't that be wonderful? But I think I would be massively supportive, just personally and just generally, for the reduction of peat. I think we'll look back and think this is madness that we were digging it up just to use on our gardens. Absolute madness. So if anybody wants to start that campaign, I'll get behind it.
Yeah, we're looking for volunteers, aren't we, Kathy? So you know, if people have got ideas, then once we've declared, had the declaration 21st of May, we'll obviously be very happy for people to carry on joining in with that declaration. You know, just because people haven't joined on the 21st of May doesn't mean that they can't carry on joining in that declaration. So you know, we hope to carry that on. But once we've kind of got over this initial step, we'll then be contacting people again to say, thank you for declaring. Now kind of, can you join with us to take action? because otherwise, you know, a group without action is just a bit of a talking shop. What we really are is a group that's about delivery and making change happen. So we're looking for people that will join us and help be community leaders and community activists to help take forward some of these great suggestions that we're getting here. So yeah, please do join us and volunteer to take part, because we kind of need all to work together on it. Claire.
Ready for another one? Okay, Sarah has asked, and again, this is to the whole panel, what single thing does each of the speakers think that the new elected council could do to make the single biggest difference to the ecological crisis?
Good question. Anyone first? Dawn. Dawn's looking like she's going to go straight in now.
Okay, so for me, I think the first thing is that the council should do is rewild grass verges. It's been done in Rotherham and other areas. It's been proven. It's got a proven track record. There's, you know, the numbers are there for them to have a look at. They, you know, I'm sure that they could speak to other councils, and they'd be quite happy, if they haven't already, to share that information. And also stop using pesticides. Again, if you look at other councils, Manchester, for example, they use Veolia exactly the same as, Veolia and, sorry, I can't remember the name of the company that does it now. Amy. They use Amy exactly the same. Yes, they use Amy. I know, how would I forget? They use Amy exactly the same as Sheffield. And if you look, you can actually look on the internet and find out that they've done research into different ways of using different pesticides, and they've actually come up with some alternatives. And now, instead of spraying, they actually, when they do need to use pesticides, they inject it instead of spraying it, so it just keeps it to a confined area. So that, sorry, I've come up with two things there, but if anybody else wants to jump in, feel free.
I thought that was very sneaky there, Dawn, getting to him. That was really good. Does anyone else want to come in on that? Rachel?
I think just start managing their parks and green spaces for wildlife, and that's, I don't see that they currently do that at all. I really don't think that the wildlife gets considered in the way that parks are managed. I think basically because of the mowing regimes, the pesticide use, yeah, so I think that's what they need to do, kind of a bit of an overall, really.
Okay, and as Dawn got to, I'm going to get to as well. So my two would be, firstly, the City Council owns quite a number of tenanted farms on the west of Sheffield. It owns quite a significant amount of land. The farms that they own are actually really fantastic for nature, because a lot of the farmers, the tenant farmers there, are farmed in a very subsistence farming way, and that's why we see some really great habitat and nature on the west of Sheffield, including some really important breeding grounds for ground nesting birds, which are, some of which are really quite rare, such as the curlew, which is quite near extinction in the UK. But actually we have one of the most amazing sites on the west of Sheffield for breeding curlew, and some of that will be down to how those farmers are farming on the west of Sheffield. And the council has in the past sold some of that land to private individuals, and they have then completely glyphosated and razzed the whole system, changed how it's been managed, and turned it over to some very boring grass, even though it was covenanted, and the council sort of put legal covenants on it for it to be managed in a particular way. It wasn't. That was ignored. There is a real kind of need to protect those farms and ensure that they are continue as an asset for the city of Sheffield. They're really, really core sites for nature, and something that we can work and improve on. And it's really important they're not lost. So that's my first one. And my second one is really that the council kind of thinks about its decision making really carefully. So through all its decision making, when it has a report to the new committees that it currently reports include an equality impact assessment, which absolutely so it should, absolutely critical. But it should also include an environmental impact assessment, so that every decision the council takes considers the potential for carbon emissions, impact on nature and biodiversity, impact on green spaces, impact on people's opportunity to connect with nature. So right through from the decisions it makes about parks and green spaces, through to the decisions it takes about what it purchases, the procurement approach that it uses, through to the planning decisions it takes on all developments, through to how it delivers schools and school grounds and maintains its highways. Every decision should be considering the environmental impact it has, so that the council uses all the funds that it has. And I know we are all aware that the difficulties of council funding, but it still has a substantial amount of money that it spends, which is all public money. So to ask the council to make sure it spends its money in ways that benefits the climate and nature crisis, so that we can turn those around, would be my two. Okay, if I could rule the world. Oh, brilliant. Okay, Kathy's silent on that one, so we'll pass back to Claire and say any more.
Yes, oh yes, they picked up. Right, from Rotherham Climate Action, they would like to know, if an individual or a community group were to do only one thing to help nature recovery, what would you recommend they do that has the biggest impact?
Oh, that's a good one too. Oh, Kathy's come in. Kathy?
Thanks, Liz. I think if you think about, I suppose we try and be a bit scientific about it. What is a one thing you could do that would have the biggest impact? And actually, the biggest impact is done not on your own. The one thing is to join with other people. And that is about talking to other people, educating other people. It's the same with the climate emergency. One of the most important actions we can all take is just talk about it and try and explain in a way that isn't a sort of threatening or intimidating to people, because it's a very, very frightening thought to people. Climate anxiety and anxiety about the nature emergency is it's very real. But I think just by standing up and talking to people and getting others to join us, we will then have the biggest impact. So it's collaboration and partnership and getting involved in some way in something that's happening that we've been talking about today, and with all the information that's out there. And declare the nature emergency. Get them to do it as well.
Dawn.
Okay, I think the movers and shakers are the council and MPs. So I think one of the best things that you can do really is lobby your local MPs and councillors and get them on board. If you've got them on board, then you can do a hell of a lot more. So yeah, political lobbying, yeah, definitely. That's me. Yeah.
Rachel.
I think from my experience with kids pantries and what we managed to set up there is, if you have a group of you, no matter how small, maybe look for a green space or or a park that's local to you that you could kind of adopt and start to look after, or join in with a friend or existing friends of group of a park, because actually you can start to have your say in the decisions and how that space is managed, and the council will work with you if you have ideas about things that you would like to change in that space as well. So yeah, I think just start noticing those little pockets, and no matter how big or small, and just start adopting them as your own.
And just to kind of develop the point that Kathy made as well, there is a theory that if 1 in 4 people take some sort of action or promote some particular activity, that's the kind of tipping point that you need to get to for behavioural and social change. And you know, that's something that we at the Trust have very much got in mind in our kind of strategy and our aims and ambitions longer term. So this is what we're doing here tonight is all part of that. Is if we can talk to the people in our communities and talk about the actions that we take on our individual green spaces, but then persuade other people to take actions on their green spaces, and so we get a snowball effect. And that effect is really critical, because that's when we get a tipping point and social change. Claire, any more?
Yes, one for Kathy here. And it's from Jerry, and he's asking, has the Church of England surveyed all of their land for taxa?
So surveyed all of their land for?
Taxa, so what species you have?
There's a lot of work going on in that. I'm glad you've asked that question. Going along with, as I said, this increasing awareness, there's mapping processes going on. There's also the individual actions. I spoke about churches count on nature, and actually that can be done in any green area, not just a burial ground, but it would just feed into the national database. There is a national group that's meeting to talk about land management, because the other thing that's so important for us and our communities is food. So that's something that, you know, is and also there's been a report from the church commissioners about using our land for affordable housing. So land is a valuable and precious asset. We need to look at the best way that it's used, mapping and data and understanding what kind of land we have, and the best way to use it with all of the crises we've been talking about is definitely high on the agenda. There's a new lead bishop for the environment called Graham Usher, and he's an ecologist by training, so he actually has quite a good pedigree from a scientific background as well. So I think in the next few years we will see increasing amount of information and action being taken on that. So yes.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you. Got some more? Have we got time for some more?
Yes, if people are willing to carry on for a little bit longer.
We have more.
Shall we maybe aim for, we've got 10 minutes till 9 o'clock, so let's maybe have up to that point, and then we'll perhaps leave it at that if we're all willing to carry on for a bit longer. So
okay, we've got a couple of questions that are kind of very similar. So we have one from Colin, which is, how can we educate the public that an area left wild or unmown, etc., is not neglected and untidy or derelict, and therefore a convenient place to drop rubbish? And Gary Hunt asks a similar question, which is, if you can suggest one thing or action that we could suggest to people who aren't engaged or particularly interested. So, for example, he says a lot of people on his street have paved their gardens as they don't want to bother with maintenance. So that's really, how can we get people sort of educated and involved?
Okay. Anyone wanting to start on that one? Oh, no. Okay, well, I'll give it a go to begin with, and hopefully some others might come in on it as we go. The point about the kind of public seeing the public, whoever the public are, we're all the public, but the point about the public seeing land as kind of derelict, I think we did quite a bit of work, and actually Nikki Rivers is here this evening. She has been doing an awful lot of work looking at road verges and opportunities with road verges, and we looked at the kind of acceptance of the public of changing how road verges are managed. So some of the ways that help improve that, firstly, is if it's very sort of close to people's houses, is actually kind of telling people beforehand. So leafleting and putting things through the post just to say, hello, you know, we're kind of planning on this, we're trying this out. We really hope that you'll engage with this. It's a trial, you know, we'd be really interested to hear your feedback, and giving them the opportunity to kind of actually contact someone so they know who's doing it and they know why it's happening. The other thing that we've seen is that helps is that particularly perhaps on a road verge area where there's space, is to leave a little strip that's really nice and neatly mown around the edge, which is a bit frustrating and annoying, but actually it just kind of shows to people that it is being looked after, but it's being looked after in a certain way. So a small strip that's nice and neatly mown just really helps people think, oh yeah, that's being looked after still, but it's just they're letting the back of it grow. And then in addition to that, signs, and I think someone on the chat put this in, but a sign that says, and there's some great signs I've seen around other cities like Nottingham, got some really great signs about, you know, this is a patch for bees and be kind and all this kind of thing. And you know, just having signs saying who's doing it, you know, who is it that's made this change or made this suggestion, and some place to contact and what it's about really helps, because otherwise people just don't know what's going on and they don't really understand what's happening. And so, you know, and then that leads to them thinking there's something wrong and there's a complaint and people have forgotten about things, but actually communication just really helps. And in terms of engaging people, I think it is challenging, and you know, I've been doing this a long time and I don't seem to have persuaded everybody, but I think it's about sharing, trying to have conversations with people with where they're at. So, you know, where there isn't, trying to find out where the kind of areas of interest for them are, and if there is any way of trying to explore whether they have come into contact with nature and what motivates them and what kind of experience they've had where they might have connected with nature. And so it depends on how you have those conversations. I've had some amazing conversations with people that initially, you know, would never have spoken to us about nature and nature conservation, but start talking about maybe a fox they saw at the end of the road, or maybe a badger they saw, or a bird overhead. Or I've spoken to farmers who, as a group, gave me quite a hard time about protecting badgers for understandable reasons of their own. But at the end of it, one or two came up to me and said, oh, but I do really love badgers. You know, I do really love them. And started talking about their local badger sets on their land. So, you know, it's finding those little ways in that connects people to finding something in common that you have, and talking about and sharing your kind of joy of nature, really. And I think we do forget that because it's so gloomy, a lot of the story, but actually, as Dawn said, you know, literally going out your front door tomorrow or this evening and looking at something, just looking at how blooming amazing nature is, you know, just looking closely at a leaf or an insect that you've noticed, or listening to bird song, you know, it's just incredible. So that's perhaps a place to start. Okay, probably one more, I think, Claire.
One more, okie dokie. Right, I did see one. One from Richard here. How can we increase the diversity of voices supporting this cause? Because at the moment it feels very white, middle-aged and middle class.
Yeah.
Do that one in 3 minutes.
yeah, I know, solve that one. Yeah, completely, you know, recognise that. And when we were talking earlier, I was talking with Kathy earlier, we were saying that we're really keen, because obviously Kathy's coming from a background of faith, and there's a really good opportunity there to actually ask people of all faiths to really kind of connect and join with declaring a nature emergency in Sheffield, and equally people of no faith as well. So it's really great to have Kathy and the diocese here, and I really hope that by Kathy being here, she will encourage other different faiths to join in. So that would be fantastic to see, of course. But yes, we always have a challenge, but I think children and families perhaps is how we need to kind of think about this, and that families of all different communities really will need in the future to draw on nature around them, and that's probably the opportunity for reaching out to a much more diverse audience than at the moment. And Rachel has got her finger in the air, so she's going to impart some wisdom. Rachel.
I don't know if it's wisdom, but I think, I mean, hopefully I did try to touch a little bit on this in the talk that I gave, and I think that to a certain extent we have to kind of maybe be a bit realistic and a little bit honest about it, that for the climate and nature emergency, to be able to kind of campaign on it, I think you really are in quite a privileged position, really, because you have to look at the other issues that people are facing, and the fact that a lot of people don't have houses, they don't have food, that, you know, they're facing a lot of other struggles on a day-to-day that makes it impossible to think about something that's going to affect them in the future, even though it is quite the immediate future. If you're you know, living in poverty, then there's other things that are taking kind of immediate precedence, really. And that doesn't mean to say that people don't care, but I think that, yeah, those issues also need to be addressed. And I think, obviously, that we all hopefully know that if you are of a certain socioeconomic status or ethnicity, then you are more likely to be faced with those issues than if you are white and middle class, I think. So I think I've been to so many meetings about the climate and ecological emergency, and seeing people say, how can we get people of colour to start campaigning on these issues as well? And I think you just have to then start looking at what issues people of colour are facing, I think is one of the things I would say. I don't know if I put that very well, but.
Okay, I think that's, oh, Dawn.
Yeah, I think before the pandemic, both myself and Richard are Greenpeace speakers, as well as the local group coordinators, and we've been out to local schools and done talks to the kids, and it's amazing how, you know, quickly they're asking questions, really want to know what's happening, are very concerned about whatever it is that you present them with. We've done presentations on plastics, about the environment, lots of different things, and prior to the pandemic, as I say, we were doing those sorts of things on a regular basis, and we'd love to go and do similar sorts of things with any other groups, businesses, organisations, BAME groups. You know, we're more than happy to do that. But it's just making that connection initially. I think the doors they're open for everyone. You've only got to look at the Greenpeace website, and it does say, you know, speakers are available to come and talk to you about the environment. It's you know, anybody can ask. So the thing is, I think sometimes it just does make that, it doesn't just need that, where you need to extend an olive branch and get to know somebody in the area to sort of break into a circle, and that's the way forward. But having a conversation, as we've said before, talking to other people and just putting it out there is the first step, and just keeping the door open. Okay.
Okay, so it's just gone 9 o'clock, and I think we've had a good kind of discussion. I hope you. I was going to say enjoyed the presentations, but probably some of it was a bit depressing at times. But in the end, hopeful. I hope you go away feeling hopeful and perhaps enthused to take action. And to join in and be part of Nature Recovery Sheffield and declare a nature emergency on the 21st of May and sign up to our website. And importantly, as we've said, several times, to tell other people to be part of this, which is kind of really important for getting that groundswell of support and ensuring then that decision makers listen to some of the issues that we've been raising. And as we said, this is just the start. Once we have declared a nature emergency alongside the climate emergency, we'll then be kind of following that up with further conversations and further information about actions and opportunities to take individually or together to really kind of think about how we can turn this around. And some of those might be quite short term, quite immediate things, but this is a long process. And if we're kind of comparing to the timeline that the UN is working on, their targets are to 2030. So it's kind of a challenge to think about this in the long term, as well as just thinking about the immediate actions we can take individually in our own lives in the next few months. So I think I'm going to leave it there and say thank you to our speakers tonight. Thank you ever so much to Dawn and Rachel and Kathy, part of our Nature Recovery Sheffield group. And thank you to those who've done a lot of work in the background, which Dawn mentioned. So we've got Ian and Nikki and Claire on the call tonight from the Trust, who's been helping manage things happen behind the scenes. But particularly, of course, thank you to all of you for giving up an evening to be part of this festival of debate and to be hold on to listen right to the end. It's quite a bit of time that you've spent with us, so thank you. And great to see some of you and recognise some familiar faces in the crowd, and to see your questions as well, which have been really thoughtful and thought-provoking. So thank you, everyone, and good night. And we look forward to seeing you declare a nature emergency on the 21st of May. Thank you.